How do you know if you're dedicated to the right church? All churches say that they're the right church. You probably won't go to any church that'll tell you we're not God's church. They all read from the Bible. They all claim, I'm talking about Christian churches. But Paul warned us that there would be a lot of churches that lead people astray. No church is going to say, "Yeah, we're the church that Paul was talking about that leads people astray." It's up to us to figure out: are we in the church, God's church, or are we in a church that's leading us astray? Second Timothy chapter 4, verse 3 through 4 says, "For the time will come where people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths." Doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that if you're in a church that's turning you away from the truth and aside to myths, probably not going to heaven. But church, the purpose of the church is to lead you to the truth. Now, there's 332,000 Christian congregations in America. I just Googled that. It might be more, it might be less, but that's a lot of church. Even if it's not 332,000, there's a lot of churches out there. You can, in some neighborhoods, you can walk maybe half a mile and run into 10 different churches. So what Paul said was true. This was 2,000 years ago. He predicted that there were going to be a great number of teachers to say what people's itching ears want to hear, and they're going to turn people away from the truth and turn them aside to myths. Your chances of finding the right church are slim to none. You got better odds than in Vegas. So if the number is true, 332,000, and there's only one that's leading you to God, or let's say there's 10, or let's say there's 50, your chances of finding God's church are you you have a better chance of finding one of the churches that are leading people astray than to finding the church that's leading you to God. Let's look in Luke chapter 14, verse 12 through 14. It says, "Then Jesus said to his host, 'When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they might invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteousness.'" This is what Jesus means when he says, "Store up treasures in heaven." That was a scripture that we looked at in a earlier video where Jesus challenged us to don't store up treasures on earth, store up treasures in heaven. Well, this is how you store up treasures in heaven. You help people who can't necessarily help you back. Helping rich people, they're probably going to pay you back. Helping people who don't need help, you're going to get your reward. What God is saying is you're getting your reward in heaven, building up treasures in heaven by helping people who have absolutely no way of paying you back. Let's be honest. If all these churches, that these 332,000 congregations, if all of them were leading people to follow Jesus, we probably wouldn't have a homeless problem. We probably wouldn't be facing a SNAP issue. If the government cut off SNAP, no problem, because churches already take care of people. We probably wouldn't have the healthcare issues that we're facing right now. God's people would be solving all the problems of poverty. But as we see in our communities, if you go anywhere in this country, poverty um, stymies whole communities. There's whole communities of people, of poor people, and there's all sorts of issues in those communities. They got horrible schools. They got high crime rates. People are killing each other. People are robbing each other. Um, Carjacking. You name it. There's certain areas, in the city of Chicago, not just Chicago, all over this country, that if you go there, it's poor people on top of poor people on top of poor people. And what happens when you got a lot of poor people? There's a lot of crime. There's no, I mean, there's no way to get around it. Crime and poverty go hand in hand in this country. But if all these churches were leading people to Christ, those people will be solving those problems. That's my point. Here's a practical way to see if your church is the right church or doing the right thing. If your weekly congregation is 10 people, it's a very small church. I don't know any churches that just got 10 people to go to, but I'm sure that there's some out there. You should be changing at least one person's life every week. If your church congregation is just 10 people, you should be changing the life of at least one person every week. You guys get together every week. You should be helping one person and changing their life. Let's say you multiply that by 10, you got a congregation of 100 people. Now, there's gobs of churches out there that are just 100 people that get together every Sunday for church. If you have 100 people in your meeting every week, you should be changing the life of at least 10 people every week, somewhere around 10 people. Certainly not one person, and certainly not zero. If you're God's church, you should be helping somewhere around 10 people every week. Multiply that by another 10, 1,000 people come to your congregation every week. You should be changing the lives of at least 100 people every week, and so on, and so on, and so on. Basically, wherever your church meets, that neighborhood or that area should be noticeably blessed because of your weekly meetings. If your church isn't changing people's lives in proportion to your congregation size, then why are you guys meeting? That's my whole point. What is the point of the meeting if you're not changing people's lives? If your purpose is not to help the poor, then why in the world are you guys meeting? That's from God's own perspective. What is the purpose of the meeting if it's not to change people's lives? Christianity is not a self centered or self serving religion. If you're not serving others, then you're not God's people. Spoiler alert, helping others is not lived out by helping them become members of your organization. And that's what I hear a lot when I talk to different people and I ask them, are you guys loving your community? And they'll say, yes, we're loving the community. We're helping people become Christians, or basically we're bringing people into our fold. That's part, I guess you can say that's part of loving people, but the very obvious way you love people is help them meet their needs. If they're poor, you give them something. If they're hungry, you give them something to eat. If they don't have any clothes, you give them clothes. That's the obvious way to love people. But Christianity today has changed that to proselytizing people is loving people. Thank you.